I don't think the delay is caught up yet. Hello, world.
Your microphone's not on. Try again.
You guys, just testing this out before we get started. If you are listening along, feel free to type something on the keyboard so that I know. Okay, well, considering this will be recorded and that's where most of you will probably watch it, I'm going to get started. So today we're going to be talking mostly about water treatment and pollution. We're also going to take a step back and look at some of the reasons why water is so special from a chemical and environmental perspective. I'm going to talk a little bit about the final project and then also go through one of our student presentations that you will also be doing online, going through them, I mean. So welcome back. Hope you guys are doing okay. One thing I'm going to need from you before Monday is just to have you check in. So either I can see that you're accessing the Moodle resources or send me an email. Just reach out and let me know that things are going okay, if I can help you in any way as well. And if you know of any students who have not been able to partake in the course or just generally are in need of some help or aid, you let me know and we'll go through that. Otherwise, today will be pretty low key, mostly lecture. You guys are going to talk about a couple things that you'll do sort of as we get towards Monday and into the next week. This will be the end of our water unit. So instead, we are going to shift to waste, which is relevant to what we're talking about today. We'll talk about wastewater, which generally we get most of that water back, but there's a question of what to do with that waste as well. So we'll discuss some of those things. Today we are going through some of the notes that you can look at also in the textbook. Good resource for now, free online. You can read it anytime. Gives a lot of good background information beyond what I can talk about in class. And okay, so let's get to it. Today we're going to start by just talking a little bit about our final projects. Then we are going to go through one of the student presentations. We'll do that online together, and then you'll add your comments on your own time. We're going to talk about water, no surprise, and then as we move into next week, you guys can do some prep reading on waste. I'll put up some good materials, and yeah, make sure you reach out to your group. And so let's start to talk about that. So while the course transitioned online pretty well, in my opinion, feel free to disagree, we're going to simplify the final project and let you essentially choose whether you do the written or the oral presentation. So in this case, you can either, you and your group, you'll decide collectively, will either do the 5 to 10 page written report if you just rather, work on paragraphs separately, combine them, edit it, and send it in. Or you can put together a video presentation if you have a little time, if you're looking to use some of your creative TikTok skills, I guess. And so that's one of the first things you're going to want to talk to your group about as we move towards Monday. We'll set aside some time Monday for you guys to get together as well. And just to sort of clarify the next steps, so I got through all of your project proposals. I shared them either with you guys or just commented straight on the document you shared to me. So if there's about 4 or 5 comments, you know that I've gone through it. If not, send it to me. I think I'm missing one group. And overall, they look pretty good. You guys want to tackle all of the problems out there, which is important. What we're going to do this next step is sort of simplify your approach. So you're probably doing one of 3 things. You're either going to be researching a problem, you're going to be doing some outreach dedicated to sharing or talking about the problem, or you may be trying to fix something directly. So just look at one of those in relation to your plan or project, and then think about what resources and materials you need. In terms of, and we'll do some of that next week too. In terms of where you're going, there are 6 things that need to be addressed in the final project, be it written or an oral presentation. This could be, again, like a video or even a slide that we can present in Google Meet. 6 things, you don't need to do all of them. You can break them up between your group. I'd say choose about 1 to 2 each, maybe something you're good at, something you want to try to practice. One of the things you're going to need to talk about is going to be essentially what you're doing, right? So a background. You're going to describe the design of your project, so a list of all of the materials or people involved and a map of how they connect. Feel free to use some nice images as well. You can sketch these things up. You're going to propose your timeline, not just how to sort of set it up, but keep it going. You're going to talk about your budget, right? You were given a $5,000 amount. I noticed some people are suggesting amounts for water filters or other resources on campus. Just make sure that that fits in. You need to think about labor and other things too. You're going to want a section that talks about hopefully the environmental impacts, but also perhaps social or economic impacts. Know that we're going to pitch these to the school, and so if you want to convince administration and people with a variety of different interests and backgrounds, you're going to want to appeal to how it will make the community better or safer, and also will perhaps reduce budgets, and then also not, of course, adversely impact the environment. And then there's going to be a component at the end. This could either be one person sharing their personal interest in this topic to sort of give a personal feel to it, or you could each write a little bit and put it together. I'm sure if you chat just by a little bit, either meeting online or by email, you can get a sense of what everyone is passionate about with regards to the project. So you notice there are 6 things here. If each of those are addressed in about a page or about a minute long portion of the presentation, then you really have your final project. You're going to want to first break these up and then see what you need from your topic to essentially address all of these things. And that's going to be the final project for now. So again, reach out to your groups. It seems like most of you know each other, which is great. And first, just read through the comments that I gave you in your document, and we'll address this more next week. There's no next deadline yet. We're going to talk a little bit more about deadlines next week. Okay, so that was a little bit about the final project. So now let's jump into our student presentation for today. Jenny is actually the one who sent me hers. Generally, a couple of you will submit, and I'll just choose one almost at random to present. So let's look through that. I'm going to blow up my screen just a little bit so you can see what I'm looking at. I thought we would look through not so much Jenny's commentary, which is actually already online, as you can see here, which hopefully you are going to start discussions for, comment on other people's comments, or perhaps even ask new questions, right? And we'll do that in just a moment. I'll let you read through Jenny's, and I'm actually going to go to the source she used, and we'll look at that critically together, so sort of address it from our own perspective. And I see we have a couple people here. Hello, Uber Westphalia. I don't believe we've met before, or ex Mokades. Welcome. Lemon Juices, I know we've been chatting in Lurks, so welcome back. Hope you guys are doing well. Feel free to say hello. And let's get started on these water resources. So Jenny used a resource from the World Health Organization. This was actually cited in my class's earlier presentation as well. So the WHO is going to be a group generally reputable, right? Right now they're giving out suggestions and guidelines for dealing with, for example, the pandemic. And so I would say overall a good source of information, right? So now let's look at some of the stuff that they're talking about. In this case, they're relating climate change and human health, so very relevant, of course, to what we're looking at. And there seems to be a breakdown here of how water is distributed globally. And so this is kind of like what we looked at back on Monday, where, oh, hey, Luke. No, that's no worry. You're good. kind of like the one I showed the other day, right? How a small portion of all of that total freshwater, or of all the oceans in this case, is freshwater. A small portion of that is going to be essentially accessible drinkable water. So this is kind of more background information to some of what we explored the other day. And now it looks like it's connecting it to some other health and resources. So pretty neat. So yeah, so what you guys are going to do today is go over to Jenny's presentation and add a thought to either one of her questions or just related to her presentation. What else was I going to say? Yeah, so hopefully I'm looking to have you guys just write a comment. Doesn't need to be more than a sentence or two long. And just sort of contribute to the discussion. You can do that up to probably Monday or so. And sort of, right, you also have this past Monday, so if you're looking back a little bit, you guys have been doing pretty good about commenting on there. And so, yeah, let's keep doing it. Hope you guys are drinking lots of water and staying hydrated throughout all of this. Okay, what else? So we have done our discussion of the final projects, and I'll put up another sheet as we get towards Monday describing next steps with that. We briefly went through the presentation, and you're going to again respond on the Moodle forum, and so now let us tackle our lecture for today. And so first we're going to talk just a little bit about the background of water, and then we will also look at how water is treated. So specifically systems related to New York and New York City, but also sort of general municipal methods. So the way that, say, the water that runs off after a storm makes its way back into your tap after a long period. Okay, so we think about water from a lot of different perspectives, obviously. Previously, we were thinking about it with regards to things like weather and climate. Now we're going to think of it more as a chemical, is one way to look at it, but also just as something that is really crucial to life. So we're going to think of it really not only as the stuff of life, right? Essentially 60% of your mass is probably a little bit more is water. We also think of water generally as things like fluid and soft and yielding. That's when we think about liquid water, but of course we have ice and also gas or vapor to think about. So water can be many different things. Interestingly, from an ingestion perspective, right, water is not only tasteless, hopefully, or odorless, but also colorless. So it's kind of this basic background, and yet it's very necessary and important biologically as well. Something that I like is that it is both a material, right? Ice is something that you can use to build, or you could use to transfer heat, for example. But it's also the matrix, which is kind of to say the environment itself, right? Often you put things in water, or you move through water. And so water is both kind of the message in the medium, I guess you might say, in certain instances. And we'll look at some examples of that in just a second. Water also does a couple special things. In this case, you can do what are called hydrogen bonds between two different waters, right, H2O. And that's going to allow, when ice freezes, to, say, be less dense than liquid water and float. And so, for example, if you've ever seen a frozen over pond or lake in the middle of the winter, the fish can still live underneath, right? They can swim around. It doesn't get quite as frozen or cold down there. And so that's going to be one of the ways that life thrives, not only with water, but also because of the properties of water. So not just chemical, but physical as well. And I want to point out, to speak a little bit more clearly about when we talk about drinkable water, we're not just talking about pure water. Pure water would be what we consider distilled or deionized water. And this is generally going to be what you use for things like humidifiers so that it doesn't crust up. Because regular drinking water has a lot of minerals in it. So naturally, from things like sodium, calcium, magnesium, copper, things that you should be ingesting, sometimes also can have things that we don't want. That's when we talk about treatment. But I just want to make clear that when you go to the store and you're looking to buy bottled water, or you're looking to drink water that's good for you, you want some things in there. You want some electrolytes like sodium and calcium. You also generally don't need things added in. Things like vitamins probably aren't necessary. You're probably getting them from other places. Similarly, you'll see a lot of water as bottled water these days that are selling you basic water or acidic water or oxygenated or whatever it may be. And know that sounds nice, probably costs an extra nickel or two, but it's probably not helping you in any way. At the end of the day, just good old tap water, especially in the New York region, is going to be enough to keep you living, which is really what we're going for here. And so I want to talk a little bit about some quotes that sort of help describe the importance of water in different ways. And so we'll find that water is kind of the metaphor in these quotes to better explore some of its properties and also just things that relate to life. Water can be a good analogy for different aspects of life. And so we'll explore where those come from sort of more scientifically. So the first that I like, and we'll come back to in just a second, is going to be that water and words, they're easy to pour but impossible to recover. Maybe you've said something you're embarrassed to have said later on, right? It's easy to let things out of a gate, like water. It's easy to break a dam. It's very hard to say collect up all that water and put it back. It's hard to take back something that you said perhaps in haste. And so when we think about water being a liquid and being able to flow, that could be a challenge, right? We could think of floods, we can think of, again, dams breaking, but we can also think about how, for example, when it rains, the water can evenly distribute itself, and so all the plants get what they need. It's going to not only rush and flow over things, but also become absorbed and go into all the nooks and crannies, which is just as important. Another sort of perspective is about how water can wear away the hardest rock. So this is sort of counterintuitive, right? We just spoke about water as soft and yielding, right? It'll go around lots of things and spill out of stuff. But it can also wear away at things. So we could think of, for example, say waves pressing against a rock, literally pressing against and creating cracks or fissures, for example, and breaking the rock. We can also think of in rivers, say the flow of the river creating erosion and wearing away at stones and mud, really thick, heavy things. And so even though water by itself is sometimes little more than just a drop, we also have the idea that collectively water can make big impacts on the environment and also, mountains, for example. Think of the rivers that pass between mountains for thought. So we can think of water as not only incredibly fluid, but incredibly powerful, right, as motive as well. One that I always like that I talk about in my Gen Chem class is that a watched pot never boils. Maybe you've been cooking over the last couple days or weeks, and you realize, right, the more you stare at it, it just never seems to go. And as true as this may seem, though we know it will boil, this is because water also stores energy very well. No surprise, perhaps one of the reasons that it fosters life. In this case, it has what's known as a high specific heat, which is the same reason why, say, you've had a hot coffee before or tea, and you've blown on it a lot, and yet it's still really hot. And so the premise here is that it takes a lot of energy to come in and out of water for it to change temperature. So energy and temperature are contrasting ideas. One is an average, the temperature, right, between a lot of things. And so for that to change, that average, you're going to need to expel a lot of energy. And so that's why when you walk into an ocean on a bright and sunny day, it still could be very cool, for example. Or the bathtub, when it's super hot, seems to stay hot forever. It's always never what we want. Similarly, the last one, which is going to be relevant also from the perspective of when we were talking about climate change, right, with how the world will continue to be here, regardless of where humans are. Water can do without fishes, and yet fishes can't do without water. Which is to say that water is technically inorganic. It's not living itself, and it doesn't really care who's drinking it. But we, of course, rely on water, and so we need to make sure that that is a priority for us. Another way to think of this is the kind of you don't know what you've got till it's gone. And so here we can think about how, right, we don't really appreciate things until we miss them. For example, the outdoors. You guys are probably hanging out inside saying, gosh, I wish I could just go for a walk or do homework in, the library or whatever it is. Similarly, when the well is dry, that's when we'll really know the worth of water in this case. And so water could be anything here, but of course it is really one of the few important things for life, right? Air, water, food, shelter, and hopefully, someone to love, which I hope you guys all have at this moment. So feel free to add in the chat if you have any other sort of water idioms, catchphrases, proverbs. As silly as they may be, they're going to be a really great place to look at big scale patterns for water and how water is used. So you can also Google those. Always kind of fun to come out with different ones. Okay, so before we actually look at water treatment and pollution, I want to just talk briefly about water from that basic survival perspective. So I want to I'm out of all my books. I actually plan to go and get some of them soon. But I did find a copy of this survival book, which is no surprise, water is going to be a big part of what's in here. And what's kind of neat is not only do they have their own section on water, but we also have a couple sections dedicated to finding water when you're outdoors. Now, hopefully you guys will never need any of this information, but what we will find is that a lot of this is going to sort of be scaled to create the municipal water treatment and pollution prevention programs that we have, right? And so first we'll start off with the fact that you do need water. I knew a guy in college who just didn't like to drink water. He would always drink soda or juice, and while those do, of course, have water in them, he was frequently ill. And so don't think that not drinking water is cool. I know that may sound absurd, but there are people. So yeah, water's necessary. It not only, again, is a vast or the major component of your body. You are mostly water. It's not in the liquid form. It's usually in a gel in your cells, but you need it to stay hydrated, right? Nobody likes to be dry. And one of the things we'll look at in just a moment is how, for example, even though we only need so much water to survive, around here it says 2 quarts of water, that's probably going to be a minimum, we use so much more water than we need. And so we'll look at the difference between what we need and what we want or what we're using. As we can see here, there's a couple sections on how drinking impure water is dangerous. And the first thing that I liked in here is how they talk about essentially treating muddy and stagnant water, and so we'll look at that in just a moment. Also, there was a nice diagram showing the water table, right, the dotted line, and then also how you might have, say, a natural spring to drink from that's near, say, either a spring or a river or something else with water nearby. And something that this covers is how, no surprise, if water is the stuff of life, a lot of other forms of life are going to have water in it as well. And so we will find often when we're looking for water trapped in plants, it can be a really wonderful resource. And where was the other one? Yeah, this was also just a surprisingly beautiful book when it came to looking at some of the different resources. Oh, I thought it had... It's missing what I thought. So yeah, let's jump in. Let's talk a little bit about how essentially we consume water, or where the water is coming from, and then also what we do with it. So last class I left you off with the question of where does the water go, right? Essentially when it's raining. And so we can think of, for example, storm water as the collection of any, say, rain, ice, or snow that's melting and flowing over time. And so one of the things that we'll find in, for example, urban areas like New York City is that because most of the ground is going to be covered with concrete or asphalt or some sort of impermeable medium, stuff that water can't pass through, a lot of that water is going to be brushed away. It's going to collect trash. It's going to collect pollutants as well, and essentially either pool or be flushed into natural environment. Whereas if rainwater or stormwater is allowed to collect naturally through soils, it can not only filter out some of those impurities, but it can go and also refill things like wells or perhaps even aquifers that help us have drinkable water for long periods of time. And so one of the things we're going to find at a school like Manhattan College, where we're on, a sizable hill, we have a couple of steps to say the least, are how can we collect this stormwater to, one, prevent it from moving all that trash around, but two, also to prevent the need to collect other water, right, and use it. What if we could use and repurpose this? So we'll look at some treatment methods for that. And I want to just point out again that our whole perspective, both with regards to water treatment, climate change, also the pandemic sort of more generally, is always that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so what we mean by this is that just like with the water that's so easy to spill and hard to collect, it is much easier and generally better to prevent things from happening or causing problems than to have to fix them after the fact. And so, for example, if we can even prevent small amounts of water from being wasted, it could have a large impact later on. The premise here being that the ounce is rather small and the pound is much larger. Right? If we think about it with regards to, an outbreak of a disease, you'd much rather be inside for 2 weeks than have to perhaps come back inside again or take a long time afterwards to help sick people. You'd rather than not be sick at all. Hence the flu shot. And so just to compare, we talked about how you need at least, 2 quarts to live. Around 1.5 gallons is probably what you would be comfortable with. And yet humans use in developed countries, around 100 gallons a day, which is, again, almost 100 times what we need. But on top of, say, the water that you're drinking and maybe basic sanitary uses. Think about also things like washer dryers. You have dishwashers. You have pets. You have watering your garden. Washing your car. All this kind of stuff that we take for granted. And in any one day, you might really enjoy an activity that requires a lot of water. Not thinking so much about water sports, for example. I'm thinking more about things that maybe use a lot of fuel, right? Because a lot of water is used in that. We're also going to be thinking about how water is consumed to make, say, plastics or other materials that are in your everyday life. So this is a collection of all of those different numbers as well. And so in this case, let's talk a little bit about pollution. So today we are going to look at different types of pollutants. We're going to categorize them in this case by whether they are living or were just living. In this case could be chemical, so generally very small, non-living, or could be just physical, right? Stuff just physically gets in the way, blocks things up, especially when it comes to water. Maybe you guys also have challenges with water that you've lived with. For example, blocked drains, or maybe you've had your water tested before. Feel free to throw in the comments any water problems you've experienced. I know back in the atmospheric pollution unit, we were talking about mold. I lived in this crazy apartment with all this mold, and it was in our bathroom, and so there was a lot of water involved. And you have to be careful, because if you let water sit out for long enough, bets are you're going to get something in there. It's just kind of how it works. Cool. So feel free to throw some things in there, and we'll break down all of the different types of water pollutants that we're interested in. So when we talk about biological stuff, we're talking about stuff that could be growing, right? Algae we know can bloom in lakes, for example, if there's fertilizer or runoff from agriculture. So this could be an example of something that wouldn't have existed there regularly, but because of the conditions you have to worry about. Whereas generally microorganisms and critters, as I like to call them, those are going to exist regardless of where you are, and you still are going to need to treat for that. But you'd have to treat extra perhaps for growing algae. If any of you have fish tanks, for example, maybe you're familiar with some of the chemicals you need to put in there. One of our students in the earlier section was talking about adding denitrifying bacteria to help clean out the tank. That's similar to some of the stuff we looked at for the nitrogen cycle. And I also want to include in this biological category things that came from living things. So this could be a dead fly. This could be things like blood and urine. It could be other bodily liquid things, or solid things that you're worried about. Also, obviously, waste, like things like manure or waste from different animals would be considered in this category. Hopefully, we don't have much of that leaking into our water systems, but pigeons, I mean, gosh, they'll do anything and everything if they want. And so looking now at some of the chemical pollutants that we're interested in, we can start with ash, for example, if there's a lot of coal mining going on, or perhaps a lot of burning of coal or other solid fuels. You're going to have lots of metals that essentially didn't combust and are collected in that ash. Here we could have things like chromium, could be magnesium, or manganese, could be lead, for example. So things that could be toxic or harmful, both in the short and long term. Right? You don't want a long-term exposure to these, but often you may not even see the effects of some of these until long periods, but whole communities can be affected. If you're looking for something to watch, Aaron Brockovich, classic 2000 Julia Roberts movie, where an everyday person, just like us, goes out and challenges the big companies that were polluting her nearby area. And she is, it's a real story. She's well known for that kind of activism, someone who might not have tackled that beforehand. No surprise, plastics could not just be a physical contaminant, right? They literally block up drains. But we also have to remember there's a bunch of other stuff in plastics to make it pliable or colored or not break down. And so things like PCBs, or I forget exactly what PCBs stand for, but I believe they're aromatic chains with chlorines. And these can leach into the waters. The Hudson at one point was actually generally contaminated with things like PCBs, and over time things get better, but again, we'd all love to be outside enjoying our wonderful place right now, but we can't. When we think of chemical pollutants, we can also think of some of those air pollutants as well. So things like sulfur dioxide, sulfur trioxide, and also the NOx are going to be, when mixed with water, producing acids, and those can be hazardous as well. right? We don't want those raining into the oceans or on the land. It's going to be as polluting anywhere. And last but not least, we get to some of the physical pollutants, which generally maybe think of as, again, blockages, right? You could have physical things that don't break down. You could have things like fats and oils, which generally separate from water. There are, and I will not share with you personally, but you can Google horrible stories of cities that have collections of solid fat in their sewers called fatbergs, like icebergs, because they just won't break down, right? They kind of collect, they separate from the water, and then they float around, and they're supposed to be horrifying. And then lastly, good old dust and sediment. This could be, just things like rock or any sort of from very small to very large. Yeah, it's super nasty. It's like one of those things I had trouble listening to the podcast about them because, anyway, Google it if you're into sort of creepy stuff like that. And so the premise is that at any time, all of these can be existing. All of them probably are existing to some extent in the water that we would like to drink. And so we can look at the fact that this water needs to go to industry, right, to make the wonderful products we need. It can also go to irrigate the farms that makes the food that we eat. It can go straight back into the environment, but we can also have that coming to our drinking water. So we now need to look at how we can tackle all of these different things. And I would argue that we take pretty much an approach based on these different categories, right? You could filter out physical things. You can do chemical treatments. Maybe you've, say, put chlorine in your pool, for example, though that could break up some of the biology as well. And then you're also going to want to make sure that you get rid of or stop growing biological contaminants as well. So the only thing I'll pause and talk about right now is that so far we're talking about treating things that are already problems, right? We're assuming that all of these are a problem we have to deal with. What are some ways that we can actually prevent problems from occurring, right? Again, prevention is always worth whatever it costs. Well, not whatever it costs, as long as it costs less than the cure. And so, yeah, let's look at some of these methods. So let's first actually look at the map of them all together. So this is a very rough diagram for a general municipal community. So this is going to probably be more representative of medium to smaller size suburban or perhaps even rural communities. Most places have wastewater treatment. If you don't know where yours is in your town, you're missing out, really. Fun stuff happens around these things. That's probably you're not allowed in, but sometimes there are reservoirs that you can walk around and walk by. So for example, it might start at your lake or reservoir, and so after that water has come in from the environment, right, it's rained in, maybe it's rushed in from, well, not a flood, but, river or a brook. Hopefully, your natural system can do all of this for you, right? Hopefully, it's balanced with pH and chemicals and filters that are natural, things like roots and plants. But bets are it's going to be diverted, and then first we'll remove most of the solids. So in this case, coagulation is going to be collecting generally things that may float or be suspended in the water. And you're going to add chemicals to essentially clump them all together so that they drop down. You're then going to have them sit and essentially fall to the bottom, and you'll draw the water off the top. And now comes the point at which you're going to start to chemically, or in case, as we see here with light, treat all of these different, all of the water that's coming through. From here, it'll generally be stored in something like a water tower, or perhaps a reservoir, another one, before it comes to us. And so know that even though you may go walk around your lake, that there are going to be several steps before the water gets to you. And so, of course, there's so many different pieces here that I can't cover with regards to the size and scale of these things, how much water they process a day, how many people are involved, testing the water, making sure that the chemicals are being added correctly. It's no surprise that in a lot of sci-fi movies, right, the villains always go for the water supply. It's scary because it is so fundamental to communities, right? Often communities may even be defined by the water that connects them or collects them. If that makes sense. Anyway, so let's look at a couple of different treatment options. So the first I want to talk about is probably the one that you would do most likely if you were to, say, go camping and you needed access to fresh water somewhat immediately. There are lots of fancy tablets and gadgets you can use as well, but filtration is going to be your go-to. And so we can start, for example, with an analogy. In this case, this is supposed to be a drip coffee. So we have our coffee grinds. We're going to be pouring the water in, and we will come out with, I guess, our nice dark roast. And the premise here with coffee is that you're actually using water to pull things through. Here in the filtration set, it's sort of different. You're going to be putting your contaminated water with sediment, water with biological stuff that you can filter out. And you could say filter through things like sand to get out, essentially, drinking water. And so in one of the survival guides that I was looking at earlier, I think it was something like you need 3 feet worth of bamboo, and if you pack that with sand, water that you put through is generally going to be a quality better than at least what you put in from a solids perspective. We'll talk in a second about the biological stuff. And so let me ask you guys, what is an example of something you've done perhaps to purify or sterilize water? Is there something in your home that maybe you've done or tried before? You can throw that into the chat as well. And so we'll move on to not looking so much at sediments, but here we'll look at, in this case, biological things. And so here we're going to take good old chlorine, which has been used in war as a weapon, but can also be used to create things like acids and essentially a component of bleach to break down any living thing that's in there. So chlorine's pretty toxic, not only to humans, but almost all living organisms. And so in this case, right, they're going to be flowing the wastewater in. They're going to be mixing it up with chlorine that they're putting into our system. And then in this case, flowing the water out. And what's interesting that I learned while I was looking at this is they don't generally take the chlorine out afterwards. What they have to be doing is balancing the right amount, considering that this could go straight to people drinking it, right? So there's a lot of work and time that goes into determining are we putting in enough or are we not putting in too much? I think that makes sense. Okay. The third, and the one that's really most relevant to why the New York system is unique, is going to be UV disinfection. So if you can think back to the Catskill, Delaware diagram from Monday, right, looking at upstate New York, because those are such large areas and they also have been preserved so well, generally most of the water that's coming from up there, which I think is the majority of the water that hits the city, is naturally filtered. And so we don't need a lot of that coagulation, sedimentation, and then some filtration process, though some of this may be used as well. In this case, what we're going to find is we only need to do some of the disinfection and then we're good. And so as they talked about in that video that I hoped you guys looked at, they're going to use UV light to actually disinfect. So to kill essentially germicidal irradiation to get rid of all those germs. And here they're going to use UVC light. And so if you remember back to our ozone discussion, ozone blocks that powerful UV light from hitting us and mutating our skin, or I should say mutating our DNA. And so what the UVC light will do in the water treatment process will actually not give super cancer, but essentially irradiate the germs to the point where they just can't survive at all, can't reproduce or anything like that. It has an incredibly high reduction rate. In this case, you can see 6 nines. That's a lot. And so in this case, right, a very small fraction of that stuff will remain. And the neat thing is that this light can also break up some of that chlorine and turn it into some less harmful chlorine components. And so in this case, right, what a wonderful tool to be using. It's very hard to industrialize or scale, but nevertheless, should be okay. And so we talked about 3 typical common treatment methods. And so, for example, what was I going to say? These are ones that you're going to find in the New York City water supply. Let's talk just quickly about a preventative measure, one that you've probably heard about. There actually is a fair bit of discussion as to whether this is necessary or worth it, or safe even. But one thing we'll find is that you can add fluorine to water, similar to toothpastes or mouthwashes, I guess, or things like that, at a very low cost, so roughly around $1 plus per person per year. And the premise is that the fluorine in here is going to help prevent tooth decay. So again, we're looking at this as not fixing the decay once it's there, but preventing it altogether. And we could imagine that dental care is not widespread in the States, at least for the average person, right? It's expensive and costly. So if we could do something to help from sort of a beginning perspective, it could be sort of more beneficial than we even imagine. And so there have been lots of places that have studied this and do or don't fluoridate. But overall, it's been in practice for quite a while now. And so another question could be, what are other preventative measures that we can use? So in this case, people have suggested a variety of other minerals to be added to our water supply. Now that might be costly, but imagine if it could, say, prevent the need for people to go out and buy supplements in the drugstore. And so some people have advocated for things like magnesium, also lithium, or even iron for people who are deficient in that to be added to the water supply. And again, some of these are more feasible or not, but we'll see. We will see. Some people believe that a lack of certain minerals here can contribute to certain deficiencies in health. And so we'll see. It can't all be treatment. Some of it has to be prevention too. I think we see that that's really where we are right now with the coronavirus, right? Making sure we prevent people from becoming exposed to it, especially the elderly, because we don't or perhaps aren't prepared for the cost of what happens if everyone were to become sick. And so do your best to, keep washing your hands and staying inside. But the good news is this will not be forever. Pretty sure I can say that. And what else? So yeah, I guess I kind of wanted to talk about what constitutes a healthy water supply. And so what I mean by this is not just that, the water literally has in it what is good for us, but we want to think about a balanced water supply as well. We want to think about how, for example, we may have access to things like bottled water, but should we not have also tools and resources to not need that? I know some of the student projects, for example, are all about, bringing water filters to campus and testing the water. And so I think that those are probably some of the places we start. But we need to sort of better understand how it will affect both, of course, the environment, but also our health as well. If we think about the last class as being sort of environmental health of water, we can think of this class as looking a little bit more on the personal and human sides of these different things. And so let's just recap a little bit what you guys are going to be doing between now and next class and also next week. The good news for this second class is my lectures are always shorter, much quicker in this case, especially when I already write things out. So I hope you don't mind if we let go a little early. So I want to talk about the fact that you're going to reach out to your group members. You're going to double check the form that you submitted to me or I shared to you to look at those comments. And you're going to begin to look at, let me bring it up again. Oh, I have it down here. You're going to begin to look at which of these 6 topics you're interested in, and you can share that with your group, and also begin to decide and select which of the 2 final project formats you're going to choose. I do need to do attendance with you guys by Monday, so I'm going to check not only who is in this feed today and who's been clicking through the stuff online, but if you can also just send me a note, let me know you're doing okay, that helps me out. Lets me know that things are okay. If you know of someone who isn't been able to join us in the class or needs a little help, again, also let me know. You're also going to go and you are going to go to Jenny's discussion, and even if you've never commented before, throw a comment up there, share your thoughts and opinions. I need more stuff to read, so I would appreciate that. And also looking for comments on the recorded versus the live lecture. I think I might try to do a little bit of each. It's a long time to make a video. And yeah, I think that's it. So you guys are going to have a good weekend. I can't believe how much shorter this lecture is. And just, reach out if you guys need anything. Stay well, and think about the water in your house, because that's also part of the quiz. I'll talk to you guys soon, and have a great weekend. When you say posted in Moodle, you mean, these here? Yeah, I'll put these up definitely, if not today, tomorrow. But these are actually just taken from the one sheet, the one page that's already on there, if that helps. And, if you're reaching out to a group member as well, and they're not responding, just let me know. And we're all going to have to celebrate Earth Week alone. I'm so sad. We had a lot of really good stuff planned, and so we're going to try to come up with some good online alternatives. I will be offering extra credit. I already have a project online, which some of you have commented about. If you're able to, We are going to be coming up with a list of things to do outdoors, also on your own to go through as extra credit, and Trash Tag, which is going to be a trash collection motivated thing starting next week. That's where we are. Have a great weekend, guys, and I'll talk to you soon. Send me an email if you have any thoughts. So long.